Good morning. Some 250 of us are gathered for this Hydrogen in Action webinar. Decarbonisation Virtual Sustainability Summit is a pre-COP26 event that features true luminaries, and that's certainly what we have here. I'm Judith Patton, Project Director and co-creator of All Energy and the co-located Dcarbonise. With no in-person All Energy since 2019, we've run a compelling series of webinars, 30 between May 2020 and March this year. Over 18,000 registered, and the webinars received over 20,000 views. Sadly, we're on the final day of the All Energy contribution to Decarbonise Week, and delighted by the number of people who found time to be with us. Tomorrow, attention turns to sustainable oceans, and on Friday, sustainable travel and farming. 2 housekeeping points. First, a speaker change. Richard Crossick from Ørsted has stepped in to speak in place of Rob Duncalf. Now, audience members, check what lies behind the resources tab. You'll see what's up next, find a full programme link, the digital bag, and information on next May's All Energy, which is the 11th and 12th of May at Glasgow's SEC. That's your diary date. Naturally, we'd like to thank our sponsors. And for the first 3 days, these include our brand sponsors, Scottish Power, Shepherd and Wedderburn, and Ørsted, whose names you'll see alongside certain sessions close to their hearts. And our session sponsors, Hitachi ABB Power Grids, Kellis Midstream for this session, and I'd particularly like to thank Kellis's Victoria Cameron for pulling this session together. SSEN Transmission, SWEP, and Driving the Electric Revolution Industrialisation Centres. Thank you, speakers and audience members, for being with us. All webinars are available on demand, not long after coming to an end. Spread the word. And now, without more ado, I'd like to pass over to Dr. Kerry-Ann Adamson of Advisium to get the show on the road. Over to you, Kerry-Ann.
Thanks, Judith. And good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. So first of all, thank you very much for attending this webinar. Now, you'd have to be pretty much not watching the news, not watching any social media, not reading the newspapers, not to have realised that hydrogen is one of the hottest topics on the planet at the minute. It's being purported in many different applications, and it's being purported as being one of the key pillars of the energy transition. Now, as it is a new industry, it is still going through very much a key normalization phase. A lot of the lexicon is still being worked out. So to prevent any misunderstandings as to what the presenters are talking about, I just want to run through some of the definitions that we're going to use, okay? So green hydrogen. Now, most people understand, but let's just be clear. Green hydrogen is going to be what we talk about when it's produced from renewable energy only, okay? So blue hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture and storage. Now, again, there's a whole rainbow of other colours out there, including purple, turquoise, pink, and other variants. But the reality is, for most of our presentations, what we're talking about, we're only going to talk about green or blue hydrogen here. So if you, before I hand over to my first presenter, Matt, I'm going to say there is an attendee question session at the end. We will run this as a series of presentations and then a Q&A. That's not to say I won't be monitoring the attendee question box. So please put in any questions. If it's any specific to any one of our presenters, please just make sure I'm aware of this. We will be running this. It is an interactive session. We are very keen to understand the questions. Because it helps us as people actually work in the industry to gauge where we are as a community and what we need to work on going forward. So that said, I would like to hand over to Matt, who's the Vice President for Blue Hydrogen at BP. Now, Matt has told me that he has worked in many parts, actually looking at the list, in all parts of the world. So I'm very much interested and curious about the presentation he's going to give. And if you see me taking notes, it's just because I'm as interested as all the attendees as to what these guys are going to say. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Kerry-Ann. Appreciate the chance to be part of this distinguished panel and to talk about a subject that is very close to my heart, which is low carbon hydrogen. I'm hoping that we'll be able to share some slides as we go. Marianne, if you could organise that, that would be great. There's a lot to talk about hydrogen, and there's been a lot of talk in the public arena, and it's great to see it getting public recognition. My goal is really to move on from the talking into the action. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll just outline what I'm going to cover today. So I'm going to start talking about how hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, fits with BP's transition from oil to low carbon energy. I'll cover a little on how we see the hydrogen business growing globally, and spoiler alert, we think it's going to be big. I'll give a taster about what's going on in the northeast of England, truly one of the world's and BP's big decarbonisation opportunities, both in carbon capture and low carbon hydrogen. And I do want to touch on hydrogen customers, because without them, there is no low carbon hydrogen business. If we could go to the next slide. So like many countries and regions, BP is going through a significant clean energy transformation. We're committed to becoming a net zero BP and helping the world to get to net zero as well. So whilst my teenage children will roll their eyes and say, "Dad, you work for an oil company," I'm confident that my grandchildren will see a very different business. We've been moving to gas rather than oil over a number of years, and as part of that, we've been in action to reduce our methane emissions, a pledge that continues over the next few years and is very important in producing truly low carbon hydrogen. But the biggest change that we're seeing over the next few years is the investment in renewable power and hydrogen carbon capture. So BP already has a sizable wind and solar business, but by 2050, it will be 50 gigawatts. To put that in context, that's about equivalent to 60% of the UK power capacity today. In CCUS, we're working on projects from the US through to Asia. And in the UK, BP is leading the Northern Endurance Partnership, which is a carbon capture project that would remove emissions equivalent to 10 million UK households. So we're with a very, very big impact. In low carbon hydrogen, BP set out an ambition to supply 10% of the clean hydrogen market in key geographies by 2030. That's definitely not a journey to be carried out alone. So it's great to be part of a vibrant, clean growth community on today's call. My passion within this mix is the hydrogen part of it. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about hydrogen on the next slide. So what do we believe about the future of low carbon hydrogen? Put simply, 1, it's real. 2, it's going to be big. And 3, it's going to be global. To achieve net zero in any meaningful way, we're going to need low carbon hydrogen. It's not about greenwashing or publicity. We have to make low carbon hydrogen for the lowest cost possible. So the industrial use and commercial use of hydrogen energy is still early, but the potential for decarbonising big industry and transport is massive. How big is big? I think we all struggle a little bit with the units for hydrogen. Is it gigawatts, megawatts, tons per year, or scuffs per day? The simplest way for me to think about it is that by 2050, that low carbon hydrogen business is going to be a similar order of magnitude to the gas business we see today. And for me, that's a business that's worth being part of. We see a mix of green and blue hydrogen. Local conditions will very much determine what is the lowest cost to get to low carbon. In Teesside, for example, where we are working on the H2 Teesside project, we think that blue hydrogen is currently the cheapest. But as renewable power costs come down, it's possible to see a longer term green hydrogen future as well. It's going to be global. BP alone has announced projects in the UK, Europe, Australia and the Middle East, and give me a couple more months and I'd add some more countries to that list. And on the screen you see a selection of those projects. At the top of the list is H2 Teesside in the UK. And in the UK, the government's goal is for the UK to be a world leader in hydrogen. We would see Teesside as a leader within the UK. And there is a growing belief that hydrogen has a key role to getting to net zero. We believe that Teesside has all the attributes of a key integrated hydrogen hub with the natural resources, the people skills, and the local demand for clean fuel. If we go to the next slide, every now and then in a career, you get to work on a project that makes a real difference. And I feel very lucky to be part of the decarbonisation plan for Teesside and the broader Northeast. As I said earlier, BP is the operator for the Northern Endurance Partnership, which is the CO2 store which will underpin the East Coast Cluster. The East Coast Cluster can store 50% of the UK's industrial cluster emissions, which is an enormous step in setting up the UK for a sustainable low carbon future. Historians among you may recognise Darlington on the map as being the setting for the first steam passenger railway about 200 years ago. 100 years ago, Teesside was responsible for a significant proportion of the world's steel production. As far afield as Australia, the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge was built with Teesside steel. Today, it's at the centre of a low carbon revolution. And across Teesside and the Humber, there's the potential for 25,000 low carbon jobs. These are long-term jobs. It's attracting new businesses, new investors. And one of those new businesses is hydrogen, and particularly blue hydrogen, which is enabled by the carbon capture process. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to touch on H2 Teesside, which we announced publicly at the start of the year, which is a world-scale clean hydrogen project. Investment level, it's not easy, it's not cheap, of the order of £1 billion, but it could create 20% of UK hydrogen clean energy production by 2030. Aim is to start up the plant in a similar time frame to the carbon capture project. We take the natural gas, convert it into hydrogen and carbon dioxide, with the carbon dioxide being stored safely and securely in the Northern Endurance Partnership. As well as removing CO2 equivalent to 1 million homes, it does bring broader benefit for the region, securing jobs, attracting new businesses, and also giving everyday consumers a chance to start getting low carbon hydrogen as a transition from natural gas. The goal is to make the low carbon hydrogen available to as broad a set of users as possible. It's also a great chance to develop UK supply chains. We believe that UK has the chance to be a leader in hydrogen. Our hope is that the skills and supply chains developed to build and operate H2 Teesside can be exported to our other projects and other people's projects around the world. So if Teesside could do it in steel, why not hydrogen? But none of this happens without the customers. So on the next slide, I'm going to just touch on some of the key customer types. So in the near term, industrial use is going to be key for adoption of hydrogen across many applications. This is heating, power, chemical input, and the production of new clean fuels. We do believe that in these applications, in fact, all the applications on this slide, low carbon hydrogen is the lowest cost net zero option for the world. We've signed MOUs with a number of customers across a range of industries who all see the benefit of using clean hydrogen. In the longer term, it will become a key element of transportation with uses in trucks, trains, aeroplanes, and ships. For some of these, like trucks, the hydrogen will be used directly. For other cases, like aeroplanes and ships, it will be converted into other clean fuels like ammonia. This all provides further investment opportunities around the Teesside area, and it is great that Teesside has been recognised as the UK's first hydrogen transport hub, and we're very pleased to be working with the Tees Valley Combined Authority on this. Lastly, on buildings, we're working with Northern Gas Networks to try and get hydrogen into the gas distribution system. They're making great progress on this, and it does open up the opportunity for everybody to start benefiting from the hydrogen revolution. My friends asked me what gives me confidence BP can be successful in a new business like low carbon hydrogen. They know that BP can do projects, experience from engineering, building, and operating some of the world's most ambitious commercial energy projects. They know that BP can do subsurface reservoirs, and I've got to say it's great to be putting carbon back into the ground rather than taking it out. But what about customers? And for me, that's the best bit. We can move our existing customers to low carbon alternatives. So for cars, that's probably going to be electrification with clean power. For trucks, it's going to be low carbon hydrogen. For the aeroplanes, it's going to be sustainable aviation fuel using hydrogen as an input. And for ships, ammonia, again, using clean hydrogen. So, and then if we can just move a fraction of our gas customers to hydrogen, that will make a huge impact as well. So I do see a very positive future, both for hydrogen and BP, and hopefully the world. So to move to my finishing slide, I'm just going to summarize. So clean hydrogen, it's going to be big. It's happening now. BP's in action across production of green and blue hydrogen, working with customers across the globe. And UK is dear to my heart. I see what's happening in Teesside and it's amazing. We think that's a great place to start the decarbonisation revolution. That means Northern Endurance Partnership for carbon capture and H2 Teesside from blue hydrogen production perspective. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been lovely to be part of this call. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Now we're moving across to Andy, who's at Kellis. Andy?
Thank you, and thanks, Matt, and for a great presentation. And hopefully, I'll be able to continue the sort of discussion further, particularly around Teesside. So I'm just going to pull up my slides, and I can't do two things at the same time. So do bear with me, and hopefully this works. So I'm going to start by actually, because the theme of the conference is about decarbonisation, so I'm going to start with hydrocarbons and the essential role that the oil and gas industry's got in playing in actually delivering a decarbonised economy. So the North Sea Transition Deal is a groundbreaking deal between government and the UK oil and gas industry to deliver a fair and affordable transition to net zero. The industry is completely on board with net zero, and have been for a number of for a number of years. But particularly, they've made some commitments to reduce emissions from our own emissions by 50% by 2030 in the UK. But in addition to supply decarbonisation, this deal covers the role of industry in developing carbon capture and storage, a hydrogen economy at scale, along with transforming the UK supply chain and ensuring we have the right people with the right skills to deliver it. So UK and Scottish governments recognise that while demand for oil and gas is reducing, it certainly will not be eliminated entirely, and it is much better that we produce it domestically to ensure the reduced volumes of oil and gas we need have zero production emissions. We maintain control over our energy security, so we're less reliant on imports. We retain transferable skills needed for the energy transition, and ultimately, we grow our greener, cleaner economy. So let me just talk now a bit about my company. We're an energy infrastructure company that's been in the UK for 7 years, and we've been building a pretty strong record, and a strong record that we want to continue into energy transition. So we own and operate critical infrastructure which delivers natural gas from the central North Sea and southern North Sea on the UK continental shelf. So our infrastructure transports about 40% of the UK domestic gas production and certainly will by the start of next year. And we're backed by two very strong financial institutions, BlackRock and GIC. BlackRock is the largest investment fund in the world, and GIC manages the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, and both have extensive experience in energy infrastructure investment. So our assets, experience, capability, and financial backing make Kellis an ideal suited partner for investing in UK energy transition. So let me talk about our core asset. So our core asset is the Central Area Transmission System, otherwise known as CATS. CATS is a major gas transport and processing system. It gathers gas from around about 30 producing fields in the central North Sea, processes the natural gas at a terminal in Teesside, and delivers the resulting products to market. So we're incredibly proud of the track record of our track record on both safety and environmental performance. And I think the stats on this slide speak for themselves. So CATS has an enviable safety record and has the second lowest carbon intensity of all UK gas processing plants. So we've also got plans in place to reduce our emissions further over the next 3 years, so that by 2025 we will have halved our emissions from when we were first an owner. But we don't want to stop there. And by 2027, we have the potential to make CATS a net zero asset. This brings me nicely on to our exciting new plans for CATS, the H2 Northeast project. So Matt's already talked about the East Coast Cluster, and we joined the East Coast Cluster earlier this year, which covers both Humber and the Teesside industrial regions. So Matt's mentioned the East Coast Cluster offers us the single biggest opportunity to decarbonise industry anywhere in the country, representing about 50% of carbon emissions from all UK industrial clusters. And H2 Northeast is a 1 gigawatt blue hydrogen plant to be developed at the CATS terminal on Teesside. And we'll utilise the Northern Endurance Partnership to dispose of our carbon within the East Coast Cluster. So we would capture around and store around about 2 million tonnes of CO2 per year. But why the CATS terminal? So the CATS terminal has access to natural gas from a range of fields, creating a diverse source of long-term gas supply. So it's already connected to the national grid, which makes it ideally suited to blending hydrogen, which is by far the most efficient way of reducing domestic emissions by decarbonising at source. The CATS site is also an existing industrial site in the heart of Teesside with space for expansion and is operated by a skilled and experienced workforce. So H2 Northeast has the ideal site with direct source of feedstock and access to the industrial and domestic markets, is underpinned by a world-class operating plant and workforce, and has the track record of Kellis and our financial backing as investors to deliver it. So if I can just summarise, where we are, the energy transition requires huge investment over the coming decades, and the oil and gas industry has to be part of a fundamental part of the solution. Demand for hydrocarbons will reduce, but will not be eliminated, as some hydrocarbon products, such as medical supplies, will continue to be needed. We need the skills and knowledge from the oil and gas industry to deliver carbon capture and storage and to develop the hydrogen economy. And blue hydrogen is the only way to kickstart the hydrogen economy at scale. So our H2 Northeast project is a great example how you can transform CATS, an existing top-performing asset, into a net zero asset for the future. And Kellis has the track record, skills, and access to capital necessary to make this happen, and we're ready now. So thank you for your time, and I'm now going to pass over to Chris Robinson of the Tees Valley Combined Authority, who's the project manager for the Teesside Cluster project. If I can stop sharing.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much for the introduction there, Andy. And I'll just start sharing my screen. I'll try to carry on breathing while I'm doing that. Here we go. So thank you very much for having me today, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you all and tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Tees Valley with regard to hydrogen. And this is the view from the Combined Authority. So just to set the scene for the Tees Valley Combined Authority and what that is, it's the amalgamation, it's the conglomeration of the 5 local authorities in the region. So Darlington, Stockton-on-Tees, Hartlepool, Middlesbrough and Redcar and Cleveland. All under one umbrella, the Tees Valley Combined Authority, with the directly elected mayor. So I'm going to be talking about hydrogen in terms of the industry in the area, transport in the area, domestic heating, and a little bit about the impact on communities as well. So the Tees Valley, in case you don't know, we've talked about it a little bit already today. Sits in the northeast of England. It's roughly between Newcastle and Hull, if you think in those terms, and about halfway between London and Edinburgh by train as well. It's a well-connected region. And the role of the Tees Valley Combined Authority is to promote the area in terms of the economy, the well-being of people, create jobs and inward investment. It's a very, very strong industrial area, and the industry is all tightly packed into the region. And I'll show you that on the next slide. But it's got a long history, and I was very grateful for Matt describing some of the history way back to the first passenger railway in Darlington and the steel 100 years ago that Matt mentioned. We've got chemicals manufacturing, materials manufacturing, import energy and generation, logistics, and so on. There's a lot going on in the Tees Valley. And we talk about the Tees Valley Industrial Cluster, and this gives you a bit of an idea of just how many industries there are tightly packed into this region. And if anybody's very fast at counting, you'll see there's 66 tabs there, different industries in the region. So this is what we call our industrial cluster. So there's lots of things there. You can see materials, you can see gases, you can see pharmaceuticals, you can see fine chemicals, you can see ammonia production, and so on and so forth. The yellow line that you can see traced around there is actually our existing hydrogen network. So we have a hydrogen pipeline already that supplies a number of the industries on Teesside. And to the left-hand end of that, we've also got hydrogen storage in salt caverns as well. So it's really useful to realise that hydrogen isn't, it's not a new industry on Teesside. It's been there for a long time. We've got a lot of infrastructure to support hydrogen projects already. We produce more than half of the UK's hydrogen demand already on Teesside. You've already heard from Matt and also from Andy that we've got 2 very large blue hydrogen projects in planning on Teesside. So BP's H2 Teesside and Kellis's H2 Northeast project. You can see on my slide I've only mentioned one of those, but things are progressing fast in the region. We've got funding for the UK's first hydrogen transport hub, that was also mentioned earlier, and the government's funding 5 hydrogen fueling stations across the country, and 2 of those are actually going to be on Teesside. So we're very pleased about that. We're also testing hydrogen. Northern Gas Networks is testing hydrogen in an actual domestic distribution main on Teesside, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. So when it comes to the colour of hydrogen, whether it's blue or green, the Tees Valley Combined Authority is agnostic on this point. We don't have a preference. We're not promoting one or the other. We generally believe that both are going to be very, very important, certainly to get up to the scale of hydrogen production that the country needs to meet net zero by 2040 and beyond. I think there's perhaps a feeling that in the long term, green hydrogen might be more significant than blue hydrogen. But we all know the issues with how much the wind blows, and of course this summer has been particularly windless. Maybe in the future, my personal view is that blue hydrogen could even be a backup supply to green hydrogen. But this is my personal view, and certainly a long term time in the future. So both are important at the moment. And just examples of the sort of supplies that we have on Teesside to create blue and green hydrogen. Andy's already talked about the CATS terminal, bringing in a large amount of the UK gas supply, which is available for blue hydrogen production. We also have the Sophia offshore wind farm being developed. That should be operational by 2026, with a capacity of up to 1.4 gigawatts of renewable electricity. So we cover several themes in the Tees Valley for hydrogen. We're looking at the industrial cluster and how hydrogen can be used by industry. We're looking at transport. We're looking at housing. And it's also important to consider the effect on people and communities. What's going to be very important, bringing hydrogen online as an alternative fuel source, as a new fuel source, is that we have a just and equitable transition here. So whether we call it just and equitable or fair and affordable, it's the same sort of thing. It's not going to put more people in fuel poverty. We've got to help get people out of fuel poverty. We've got to use this opportunity to create jobs and skills. And it's an opportunity to create the green revolution on Teesside and start exporting these skills and technologies as well. In terms of industrial decarbonisation, we're working through the BEIS Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, which is funded by BEIS through UK Research and Innovation, Innovate UK. So they're funding 6 clusters around the UK with the aim to have 4 low carbon clusters by 2030 and 4 net zero clusters by 2040. And the Tees Valley cluster plan is one of those 6 clusters that's being funded in this way. And that's my day-to-day job, is working out the strategic cluster plan, which brings together all the different aspects to decarbonisation: hydrogen, renewable electricity, and carbon capture usage and storage, and how these integrate together, how the different industries on Teesside will use these and can work together, and the sort of strategic planning we need to make it real and happening. Matt also talked about the East Coast Cluster, and they're currently bidding for funding through BEIS's cluster sequencing competition, and we're all eagerly awaiting the end of October when the announcement for the Track 1 clusters will be made. I need to move on a little bit more quickly because I see I'm getting up to my 8 minutes. I've talked a little about hydrogen industry, so I'm going to move swiftly on. And of course, Andy and Matt have both talked about their projects. So the principal idea behind hydrogen industry is fuel switching, and I've already shown you on the previous preceding slide, that we have that hydrogen main there already, and there's lots of companies very closely situated around that can readily use hydrogen as part of their fuel switching strategy in the future. In terms of hydrogen transport, we've been designated as the UK's first hydrogen transport hub. We've got 2 hydrogen refueling stations in development in Middlesbrough and Redcar. At the airport, which is partly run by Tees Valley Combined Authority, we have 1 aircraft tug, 2 hydrogen fuel cell cars, and 1 hydrogen converted forklift truck. So there's trials there to decarbonise the airport ground services with the use of hydrogen. And in terms of housing and communities, Northern Gas Networks is currently working on a project on a former housing estate in the Redcar area. Now this has about 70 houses were demolished there, so about 10 years ago. And all the services, all the gas mains and so on, still remain in the ground. So this is a really good test site for Northern Gas Networks to test hydrogen in an actual network delivery system for domestic properties. And we're also working with Northern Gas Networks to bid for the UK's first hydrogen town. So potentially 10,000 homes converted from natural gas to hydrogen heating systems. So our vision at Tees Valley Combined Authority is to make the Tees Valley a global leader in clean energy, low carbon technologies and hydrogen. The aim is to achieve net zero carbon industrial cluster by 2040, to provide good jobs with long-term prospects that local people can access. So thank you very much for having me speak today. I'm now going to hand over to our next presenter, who is Filippo Gatto from Arup. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. This is not Filippo, as you can tell. As with the rules and the laws of doing a webinar, something has to go wrong. It's just one of the laws. So whether it's a fire alarm going off or whether it's somebody forgetting their own camera, things happen. Now, today, our thing that's going wrong is we have lost the next presenter. I'm sure not permanently. So what I'm going to do is take chair's rights and go on to Richard. And then hopefully, as we get Filippo back, we can slot him in at the end. Thank you. You're here? Fantastic. Yeah, we haven't lost him. He's back. Yay. Thank you.
So I'm here, though unfortunately you won't be able, well, maybe fortunately you won't be able to see my face, but I'm here in voice, so I can actually kind of continue with the presentation. If somebody can put on the slides, then I can carry on. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the hydrogen vision for Teesside, and the previous presenters have already given quite a lot of all the various materials away, so I'm trying to gain time and go relatively quickly. So what is important when you look at an industrial cluster, of any industrial cluster, is to bring together three key components. One of them is a vision and a view to understand actually what is the ultimate objective, the ultimate goal to where we want to go. The second is to trying to bring the stakeholders together, and then finally you need to have a business case actually for that particular kind of vision to come together and go forward. And then finally, once you got the three components together, then you have a roadmap to actually deliver it on time, because we are running, as you all said, against the clock in terms of our achievement of net zero. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the work that we're currently collaborating with the key stakeholders, we looked at kind of, we know that these are a tremendous potential opportunity to achieve decarbonization. And the first step is looking at the current landscape and what is in there on Teesside, and we already seen quite a lot of the previous, what Chris presented earlier on around actually what is in the area. So there is a little bit of mapping and trying to understand what it is currently in Teesside and how can you imagine actually what Teesside might look like in the future. So it's an assessment of the current existing network, the existing asset, the existing capabilities, and the existing source of demand, and then actually connect them to what they might be in 20, 30 years' time. That is a first step, is to an assessment of what is there and what it might look like. So we are looking, for example, to developing a map of the existing kind of assets and the existing network, and then look ahead actually in trying to play around with the various potential options that you might have actually to achieve a net zero clusters. So the next slide, we look at all the various kind of stakeholders that are actually involved into the cluster Teesside, and there is a number of hydrogen producers. Which are already kind of producing or will be producing in the future. There are off-takers, so the users of hydrogen, and there will also be kind of companies that will be part of the supply chain, particularly when it comes to the transportation and the storage of the hydrogen. And then finally, you got all the key stakeholders around local authority, government bodies, which are key parts of the strategy, but also will be those that will kind of liaise with the local community as well and make sure they are bought into the hydrogen vision. So once we looked at what is potential vision, we look at the stakeholders. The next step is trying to understand what is the business case for the Teesside cluster for hydrogen. And we looked at it in three parts of the supply chain. So the next slide, we look at the demand side first. So what it is actually the potential kind of demand for hydrogen, how can we actually estimate that? And there are obviously a number of scenarios that you can paint that. But the first step is trying to understand actually what it is the current emissions and what is the future plan for decarbonization into emission and the role that hydrogen can play in that decarbonization. So on the top left, we look at the total emissions in historical figures. Then on the bottom left, you look at a potential projection of how you want to achieve kind of hydrogen decarbonization up to 2050. And then on the right-hand side, trying to estimate what is the overall kind of demand that you might have from hydrogen. On the top, you see the national hydrogen demand based on current kind of estimates, for example, from BEIS and the Committee on Climate Change. That's the overall national. And then you have kind of that contribution that may come from Teesside on the bottom. Currently still working out and trying to understand what that level of contribution is, but it's important to understand how it fits in with the national strategy. And obviously you got different scenarios. Some of them may be slightly kind of higher or lower, and some of them might be a little bit more kind of inverted commas aggressive in the shorter term in terms of how actually you deploy hydrogen in the years up to 2030 and how much it might come in the later decades. Then once you understand a little bit demand, you need to look at what is the supply. So in the next slide, we show this potential kind of supply of hydrogen and where it might come from. And you can break it down, and here for simplistic reason, we break it down from blue and green. And as we said before, there is no necessarily a preference for either. All technology and all components of the hydrogen supply chain will be needed. But it's more likely the potential you may have, and this is just one scenario, which hypothetical scenario, you may have blue hydrogen early stage and you have green hydrogen later on. But the combination of those two will vary depending on how the projects that we just heard about will develop over time. And then obviously you build up over the first few years and then actually tail off in the later years in terms of new capacity which is added to the system, particularly as we move to kind of a longer term more green hydrogen future. And then you combine that with the level of demand, and then you could in theory come to a situation where actually there is an excess potentially of hydrogen produced in the industrial cluster, and therefore Teesside will contribute to the overall kind of achievement of that kind of hydrogen strategy at the national level through the export, if you want to call it that way, or to the contribution that it may have hydrogen to other regions as well. The industrial cluster, a lot of hydrogen production, and then you can actually take it to other regions as well. The other component to keep in mind is that hydrogen of the variability, not necessarily over the years, but also within the year. So there are seasonalities, there is also daily demand that might change. Therefore, the role of the network and potentially storage is going to be very important. And once you understand, obviously, the role that the various part of the supply chain and the various application, part of the vision is also to understand, and as I show in the next slide, is the implication that it might have of the deployment of hydrogen in the Tees Valley, in terms of the benefit it might bring to the region and to the UK, and in particular in unlocking longer-term economic, social, and environmental implication and benefits. It will provide a boost to economic activity. It will probably diversify revenue stream because it will support business growth and also inward investment in companies locally, as Chris was highlighting earlier on. It provides social benefits by increasing the level of skills and also develop a fit-for-purpose labor force, which will actually support the development of subsector and also emerging sector. It could become a kind of a center of excellence for hydrogen in the UK, and therefore will increase that level of potentially skills, education, and jobs. And then also obviously have a very important environmental contribution in terms of improve the sustainability of the supply chain, promote low carbon fuel in the cluster, but also across the UK as well. And finally, as I said, once you bring those kind of three elements together, the vision, the stakeholders, and a business case, you need them to deploy to a roadmap, which is between now and 2050, what we're trying to achieve. And that's the last slide when we look at what can we do between now and 2050. There are certain milestones which are already set by the government and by local authorities, but obviously how Tees Valley will fit into that is very important as well. In particular, when it comes to the consultation that currently is going on business models, the various funds that have been launched, and also the deployment of the CCUS clusters as well, how the hydrogen deployment fit in all of that as well, up to 2030, and post 2030, the expansion of those production facilities. Over time, that vision will develop with a number of steps that need to be achieved and milestones in the roadmap to 2050. So overall, it's very important to start with a big vision and understanding the role that hydrogen plays in the Tees Valley, but also the role that it might play overall in the decarbonisation of the UK. Thank you. And I'll pass it back to the last speaker now, which I believe is, I'm not sure whether Rob is on, I can't see at the moment. Oh, Richard, sorry.
Hi there. Thank you, Filippo, and it's great to be part of this conversation today. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to actually shift the conversation very, very slightly, both geographically and in terms of technology. I'm going to be focusing now in the next few minutes looking at green hydrogen in a bit more detail. And I'm also going to be focusing much more on the Humber, which is where Ørsted is based at the moment for a lot of our offshore wind projects. And I think the first thing to do is really just to set the scene of what that challenge looks like in the Humber. And if you can just look at the broad, you can look at all the figures in detail here. But as you can see, the Humber is a huge industrial emitter in the UK, by far the largest at the moment, has a huge industrial base. It has a lot of similarities with Teesside, which is, as well as geography, the industrial makeup is also why we're working so closely together on the East Coast Cluster. But you're looking at a lot of refining, chemical, steel, and lots of other similar industries. And actually, and we look on in a minute, just like in Teesside, you have a large number of different consortia working together, different projects looking at the production of storage, companies that need to, production of hydrogen, companies that need to use hydrogen and then have the demand. And you're similarly looking at a number of pipelines, both transmitting hydrogen around the region and also taking their CO2 offshore for sequestration. So it's a huge amount of similarities going on. However, I mean, the main difference here for Ørsted is that we're an offshore wind developer and we're a renewables only company. And again, looking at why for us, Grimsby, the Humber and this area is such a ripe opportunity for green hydrogen. We also call it renewable hydrogen, by the way. It's just the capacity of offshore wind that we have in that area. So if you add up our Hornsea 3 and 4 projects, which we're developing now, we're going to have a capacity of around 9 gigawatts of offshore wind in the next few years. And that's just Ørsted alone. That doesn't bring in the other developers in the region. And it also doesn't bring in just the vast expansion in offshore wind that's going to continue throughout the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. There's a phenomenal resource in wind. And it was alluded to earlier as well, there was a large amount of resource further up the coast as well for the Teesside cluster. And the first project that we're doing, this is our first hydrogen project in the UK. This is Gigastack. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, it's going to take renewable electricity from our Hornsea 2 offshore wind farm. It will transmit that electricity. For sure. Something's going on with my slides. I'll keep on talking. We will transmit that electricity to shore. It will go through ITM's electrolyzers. We're looking at a roughly 100 megawatt project in the medium term. And those electrolyzers will having produced the hydrogen. It will then be transmitted to the Phillips 66 refinery and used in their processing. At the moment, it's just finished its feed study stage. It's been very successful and we're looking to take it to the next level soon. And I'll come on a little later in the next couple of minutes about what we need as a company and how we need to work together with government if we want to take this to the next stage of the project. And what have we learned from the project so far? It's been very successful. It's the first of a kind, the first of its scale in the UK by a long way. And it's the first time that we and all of these partners together have tried to put all of these technologies and all the 3 stages together into one project. There have been the usual number of teething problems you get from a first of a kind project, but I think one of the key lessons for us is they've all been solvable. They've all come through the other side. There've been absolutely no red lines, nothing that makes us think that this isn't possible in the future. And a lot of what we've been doing with this work is looking at what, not only the sort of technological barriers, which, like I said, are quite easy to solve, but where are the sort of regulatory hurdles that we need to overcome. So the current regulatory system is not yet designed for this kind of projects, linking the electricity system with hydrogen production. And we've been spending a lot of time working out where you need to place various bits of equipment, where you need to place literally various bits of meters, and how the system's going to need to be tweaked and adjusted if this is going to go forward in the future. Again, coming out the other side of that, it's pretty clear to us that there's nothing unsolvable there. There's nothing that can't be tweaked, that can't be adjusted. And what we're feeling is a large amount of interest from Ofgem, from BEIS, to speak to us and to speak to others about how can you make this work. I think one of the other lessons, oh, there we go. I do not know what's happening with my computer, excuse me. So if someone has control of my slides, please do move them forward. And what does this mean in the next stage? What do we need to get this project off the ground? What have we learned? So the first thing that we've observed is there's a lot of positive news coming out from BEIS, a lot of positive news coming out from the government. The 5 gigawatt target is very, very much welcome. And actually the dual approach from blue and green that we see from the government is also very much welcome from us. I don't see these two technologies as being in conflict with each other. In fact, I predict that a lot of the infrastructure that's going to be initiated from blue hydrogen to begin with, which are slightly further forward at the moment, those pipelines will then be utilised by green hydrogen, working alongside blue further down the line. I think a lot of what we're seeing, though, is at the moment, whilst a lot of the various revenue models that are coming through and the various plans that are coming forward are working very well for blue, the detail's not yet there for green. And what we really, really urge from the government is to get that detail. Again, it really should be noted that there is a lot of attention coming from BEIS and a lot of work going on with this in the background. With everything that's been going on in the last year and a half, it is not surprising that things are slightly delayed from where they are. And actually, when I speak to various of my colleagues in other countries around Europe, they're seeing similar things. Things are slightly delayed at the moment. But what the key element is going to be for green hydrogen is that kind of revenue piece. How are we going to get that revenue piece together? How are we going to bridge that gap in funding that at the moment exists between both blue and green and what I call grey hydrogen, which is producing large amounts of funding. And that CFD model is really useful. I'm certainly hearing a lot of positive elements from the blue hydrogen projects. Again, for green, what we really need is that little bit more detail. And I think the last sort of caveat I'm going to say is that if we want to get this opportunity coming now, if we want to get these projects up and running, such as the Gigastack project, around 25, 26, and that is what we're hearing from the government, then we are really going to need a lot more clarity on that in the next few months if we're going to get that moving. And if it does start being delayed anything further past January 2022, for example, the next month that the revenue and that the regulatory regime is delayed will be a delay to the project. But all in all, what we're feeling is a huge amount of positivity and just a sense of how much this is going to be changing in the next decade or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And apologies for those of you trying to follow the slides that were just a little bit delayed there, but I'm sure you got the gist listening to Richard, who did an excellent job. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to the questions. So again, anybody's listening, please put your questions in the chat function. A reminder, a question is a bounded thing that you would like asked to one of the presenters. And Richard, I'm going to go back to you first. Apologies. Well, not really. Mainly because you work in communication strategy as well. And I think this question's really fundamental to a lot of how we go forward with this industry is how do we improve or build upon communication strategies for hydrogen in general so that we bring along with us people who are not working in the industry, who are the homeowners or the drivers or the actual off-takers. What kind of strategies do you see we needing to adopt as a sector to move this forward with everybody coming along with us on the journey?
Thanks. I think there's sort of different elements to this, and I think one of the elements clearly are the end users you're talking about here, and how do we persuade them that these are technologies that are safe, whether they're in the home or whether it's related to transport. That I think is easier done when you begin to have projects up and running and live. And actually, I'm not aware of any major pushback around, for example, hydrogen buses or hydrogen trains in any of the cities that they've been adopted in. Apart from the odd question, I don't really see it as a problem. I think for the wider piece about moving the hydrogen economy forward, I think there's lots of governments get it, and I think what you're going to see actually is you're going to see regions like the Humber or Teesside leading it. And if you want to sort of see communications and action, I was like someone like Ben Houchen talking about how hydrogen can provide jobs, how it can help transform that community, and how actually more than anything it can keep existing industry up and running. Because I think the scariest thing for a lot of people about the energy transition is this going to mean the end of manufacturing, the end of glass, chemicals, paint, refining, steel, etc. And if this transition is going to work in any meaningful way and get public support alongside it, it's going to have to be demonstrated relatively early on that it's actually going to support and maintain these jobs, and not just be a byword for offshoring all these emissions elsewhere. But I think it's by actually demonstrating jobs and demonstrating projects in action that's when it becomes a lot easier to sell.
Well said, thank you. So Matt and Andy, I'm going to turn to you for the elephant in the room question, which we knew was going to happen, about CCS, blue hydrogen. So there's been a lot of discussion on efficiency, right? We get this a lot. There's been a lot of discussion on, is it real? Is it worth it? Now, you two guys are at the sharp end of this. You're working in this on a daily basis. So what is your perspective on why blue hydrogen should be part of the mix, why we need this diversity, and why it isn't the words being used are like greenwashing, right? Why, as BP, Kellis, you guys are at the sharp end of this. So what are your thoughts on that?
Andy, are you okay if I go first?
Yeah, go for it, Matt. Yeah.
So we're not blue or green. So we believe in both blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. And I put up some of our projects earlier, and they're balanced between blue and green. We think there's a space for both. And it really comes down to what is the lowest cost way to produce low carbon hydrogen. So as a taxpayer, I want to get to a low carbon UK, but I want to kind of do that in the most affordable way possible. So by producing blue hydrogen in a way that does capture the vast majority of the carbon emissions is a route to a low carbon future. There has been some studies published recently which I think are a bit misleading about the carbon intensity of blue hydrogen. If you look at the latest technologies, both from a gas production perspective with low methane intensity production, with the latest capture technology for CO2, and remember, people haven't really focused on capturing high percentages of CO2 until there was a chance to store it. So the next generation of hydrogen plants will have much, much, much higher CO2 capture technology and applications. And then the last bit is the safe and secure storage of the CO2, again, where the world is gaining experience how to do it. So the Hydrogen Council, which is an organization that looks at all forms of hydrogen, it doesn't have a particular agenda, publishes some helpful guidelines. They call them decarbonisation pathways, and they show the carbon intensity from a variety of different ways of making hydrogen. And if you look at the most up-to-date technology for producing blue and green, on a life cycle basis, they're very similar, which returns me to the start of my answer is, what's the lowest cost way to get to low carbon hydrogen? So for BP in Australia, loads of sun and wind, it's green hydrogen. That's very simple. In Spain, I mean, we do remember going on holiday to Spain, I hope. Lots of sunshine, lots of cheap renewable power. Again, green hydrogen makes sense. Where you've got summer which has world-class CO2 storage just next door and still world-class gas, then blue hydrogen is a valid choice. It does pain me to always be kind of like targeted as the bad guy, but really our goal is green and blue hydrogen with low carbon content. Andy, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely in terms of there's a place for both blue and green hydrogen, and I think you know that's been well made. I think just a couple of points I'd just add to what Matt was saying. So there's been one particular report I think issued in the States dispelling blue hydrogen as being particularly bad. I think if you analyse the information and data in that. Anyone who did blue hydrogen to that level would be doing it badly, and we certainly don't intend to do it badly. It's about definitely having very, very low methane emissions, which is part of the North Sea Transition Deal and part of the commitment of the industry to deliver in the UK, and the UK regulators will hold us to account with that. And it's about making sure that we have efficient ways of converting that and capturing the carbon, as Matt's already mentioned. So if you do it right, and we certainly intend to do it right, and that's how we operate our facilities, blue hydrogen is very, very green, and it is part of the solution. And I don't think I need to convince too many people with what we're seeing at the moment about if you put all your eggs in one basket, something can go wrong. It's about a diverse, excuse me. It's about a diverse sort of source of energy, and whether that's renewables combined with clean natural gas converted to hydrogen, it is all needed, and we certainly think that that's part of the mix.
Thank you. So moving on to Chris, and anybody else who actually wants to take this as well, would be really interested to hear. But when we're going to, as a consumer, are we going to be buying green hydrogen or blue hydrogen? Are we going to be buying low carbon hydrogen? Or are we going to be buying when we go to refill our car at your nice, shiny new refueling station? Or are we just going to be buying hydrogen? So what, as a consumer, are we actually going to be buying, and how do we know, or will we even know, the carbon intensity of it?
So I'll pick that up first, Kerry-Ann. I think the business models and the markets for hydrogen in that regard are still being established, and this is something that BEIS is working through at the moment. I think what we all see as those working in industry or working with industry is that the hydrogen will be supplied into the network and blended. I don't think that there will not be a separate supply of blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. The infrastructure just won't be there. So I think as users, as consumers, we'll be buying low carbon hydrogen, and whether its origins are blue or green, it won't really matter to us. What will matter is that the industries are properly regulated so that the blue hydrogen has its CO2 emissions and its fugitive CH4 emissions driven down as low as possible. And so ultimately it won't be a concern for us because those safeguards will be in place. I think I just wanted to add in a little bit about the blue and green mix as well. If you think that essentially you need a lot of electricity to generate green hydrogen, and at the moment our electricity generation in the UK is something like 20% of our overall energy usage. So to convert our energy usage to predominantly hydrogen or hydrogen electricity, you have to have much greater electricity generating capacity than we currently have at the moment. And that's why blue hydrogen makes an awful lot of sense for the UK. So blue hydrogen done properly will get us a long way into this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that question about what the consumer will actually buy?
And I'll come in from the air, from the sky. I think Chris said it very well. Ultimately, it doesn't matter whether it's blue or green. In the same way as electricity at the moment today, you still kind of buy blue and green, but you don't separate, sorry, not blue and green, you buy kind of renewable electricity or different type of source. You're not separating out what it is. So the main point is developing a market by which you actually connect that supply chain and the supply of hydrogen, which will be low carbon, to the actually end user. And so that's kind of the development of the market is probably the most important part, and trying to find what users you do more than actually what the generation and the type of hydrogen will be produced in the end. So I don't believe that in the end the consumer will have a product which will be differentiated between the different kind of sources as well, provided they all meet the requirements that are needed to achieve net zero, basically.
Thank you. Now, I'm conscious of time, so let's just move on. Right, we have 2 questions on heat pumps. I don't know who wants to take these. Filippo, maybe you can, but yeah, thank you, Matt. Why are we going down the route of hydrogen in the home when heat pumps are more efficient? That sums up both questions in one. Matt?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And like many good questions, there's not one answer. So it's going to depend on the circumstances. So there's going to be some housing stock which will be very well serviced by heat pumps. And there is an electrical efficiency there, which has been pointed out in the question, and it's absolutely right. For other places, and I kind of go back to Chris's comments around affordability and fuel poverty, there'll be some places which just aren't as easy to convert existing housing stock to heat pumps. And for those, hydrogen may be the best solution. So I'm definitely not advocating 100% one way or the other. It will depend on circumstances. And we just need to recognize that there's not a one size fits all solution.
Yeah, and if I add in, I think Matt is absolutely right. It will depend on the property. I think we come from a relatively unusual position where we have more than 80% of property on gas. And there are a few countries, my own country in Italy is the same, but there are a lot of other countries where actually there are different multi-fuel, multi-vectors. So in Scandinavia, they may have actually heat pumps, they have electricity, in some places they have gas. In a similar way, that would be the future for in the UK. You will have different solutions for different properties. There won't be one size fits all. And I don't even think we'll have a situation where now in the UK where more than 80% are from gas. It will probably be much more diverse and more evenly spread, in my view, in the future. And it will depend on regions and it will depend on properties.
Richard?
And yeah, just very quickly to add to that, actually, I'm quite neutral on how far you go down the hydrogen heating pathway. But before you even get there, the amount of hydrogen you're going to need for heavy transport and for industry is huge. In some ways, I feel it's a red herring of a question, because it's only a decision we're going to need much further down the line. We're nowhere near reaching that limit yet.
So,
sorry, Karen.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
I mean, I think it also reinforces the point I made earlier about the diversification. It is that's what's really important with our energy supply, is that we have a diversification of sources, we have a diversification of uses and ways in which we can use this. And if you end up relying just on one route, whichever route that is, that's where you have problems in the future. So keeping more options open is definitely going to be better for energy security in the UK.
Long-term resiliency through diversification. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. One final question I'd like everybody to address, please. I think it's a really interesting one. Timescales, right? For those of us who've been in the industry a while, we know how much is accelerated in the last few years. Just in the last handful of years, this has gone from virtually a standing start to 60 miles an hour. But the question is, what is the estimate of the whole transition timescale? Now, obviously, that's not a non-bounded question, but I refer back, Matt, to your comment at the start that by 2050, the hydrogen business is going to be the same size as the oil business today. That's astronomical, right? So say 2030, 2040, where do each of you see the hydrogen industry being? Just say the UK, because every country is different again. So where do you see it being in our own patch? Let's start with anybody wants to jump in.
So I can tell you a little bit about the programs that we're working on in the Tees Valley region and other areas. So in terms of industrial decarbonisation, and I talked about how hydrogen, renewable electricity and CCUS are all parts of that. And of course, you know, those three interlink very strongly as well. So under the government's cluster plan projects, the aim is to have 4 low carbon clusters by 2030 and 4 net zero clusters by 2040. And then as a more or less an enabler to that is what's called the cluster sequencing competition. And we'll find out who's on track 1 of that at the end of this month. And under cluster sequencing, BEIS and the government will be backing 2 industrial clusters to have operational CCUS schemes by the end of 2026 and 2 more by the end of 2030. So you can see the timescales are actually very, very rapid in this. So that's industrial decarbonisation rather than hydrogen specifically. I'll pass over to other people to answer the hydrogen specifically.
Maybe, sorry, Andy, I just wanted to hopefully correct what I said about the scale of hydrogen. So similar magnitude as gas is today rather than oil or oil and gas. I mean, but either way, it's still very big. So really the pace of the hydrogen development is driven by customers. We can produce hydrogen today, but there isn't a customer ready to take it. So, and what's going to enable customers to take it is what is called the government business models. It's the incentives for people to adopt truly low carbon forms of energy, and that varies around the world. UK, I think, has done an amazing amount of catching up and even moving towards the lead in the last 18 months. So the best indication we've got is that government target for 2030, which is about 5 gigawatts. I'm sure all the producers on this call will be ready to do more, but the government needs to kind of pace it along with investments across a whole range of low carbon opportunities.
Okay, can I just have one more response, because we're actually running out of time already, which is a shame. So Andy, I know you, or Filippo, sorry, voice from the sky, sorry.
So if Andy wants to go, I'm more than happy to step down, but yeah. I think
keep going. So fine.
Oh, thank you. I think Matt is right. We did some back of the envelope calculation, and gas today, in terms of value, is about 22 billion based on looking at base numbers. Hydrogen probably be something around between 20 and 25 by 2050. And if you look at the projection from the Committee on Climate Change and BEIS, the vast majority of the step-up increase will be between 2030 and 2040. So when you think about where you're going to be, 2030, 2040 is when you step up from about 5 to about 15, 20 billion in terms of size and market size. So that's decade. But as Matt said, you need to prepare it this decade. That's when you prepare it, you do the policy, you start the project, and then 2030 and 2040 is when you need to.
Andy, one quick soundbite.
Yeah, if I can just one thing, I'm more optimistic than that this will take off incredibly quickly. I mean, if you look at the pace of change over the last sort of 12 months, it's going to happen. If it gets the backing of government with the clusters will create the demand. They will become self-fulfilling, and it'll be a positive, positive sort of transformation, I think.
Fantastic. So thank you very much to everybody who's been on this panel. The hydrogen industry is coming out of the shadows, as we all know this, but not only does it need to decarbonise, it needs to do it in a way that makes it safe for users in the everyday, not just in refineries, ammonia plants, but being able to refuel your car, your truck, whether your boat is going to be plugged into ship-to-shore power. All of these applications have to be deployed and have to be safe. It is not an understatement to say there is so much work that still needs to be done. We need all hands on deck on this. Everybody is needed. We need to go along with this together, and we all need to work to create this end goal that we're all working towards. An environment where decarbonisation is a reality and not just something we talk about today. To quote one of my favourite films, we need to stay on target. We need to stay on target, stay on target, stay on target. And that is the only way we're going to make this happen. If you're interested in this industry and coming on board, whether to work with us or whether to come along along the journey as a policymaker, insurance, accountancy, engineering, everything you can imagine, you are needed in this industry to help make this happen. I hope you found the presentations interesting. I know I have. I've been making notes as we go along. And I just want to say to our presenters, thank you very much again for your attention, for your presentation, and for your honesty about the challenges ahead. So to Judith, thank you for organising this, for putting this together, and to Callis for suggesting this. I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and I'm sure the live presentation is about to stop any second now. So thank you very much.